It's true that some people's lives are marked by tragedy. Death in the family, accidents, and illness seem to unfairly stalk some folks. But for Belle Gunness, that tragedy seems to have been self inflicted. Welcome to History is Criminal. I'm your host, Mick Biddick, and with me, as always, is my beautiful wife, the unqualified and unapologetic Kimberly. In this week's episode, we're going to take a look at the horrific tale of the Ogress of Indiana, Belle Gunness.
Unapologetic is right, and I won't be apologizing for what I'm about to say either. If bad luck was her cover story, Belle was out here manufacturing tragedy like it was her side hustle. I mean, come on. At some point, you stop being cursed and start being the curse. Let's dig into the dirty past again.
Born Behind Paulsdatter Storset. Paulsdatter, by the way, means Paul's daughter in Norwegian. On a family farm in Selbu, Norway, on the 11th of November, 1859, she seemed to be a tough, strong farm girl, but she wanted something better. Like so many in the late 1800s, she thought that America is where she would make her fortune. So at age 21, she moved to Chicago, changed her name to Belle Peterson, likely in an attempt to fit in, and moved in with her sister Nellie and her husband, who had immigrated to the United States just a few years earlier. Belle was able to find work as a maid, but soon found work as a butcher much more rewarding. Though a field dominated by men, Belle could more than hold her own. She was said to be incredibly strong, standing 5'7", very tall for a woman in the 1880s, and weighing between 210 and 250 pounds, with the ability to swing a cleaver with the best of them. Belle was said to have an hourglass figure, helped by a corset that amplified her 48-inch bust. With golden blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a broad Norwegian smile, she turned quite a few heads. It was a time period when full figured women were desirable. Having a little meat on the bones was a sign of health and prosperity. So even later in life, when Belle topped the scale at over 250 pounds and still squeezed into that corset, she was attractive to many male suitors.
I may not have an hourglass figure or a history degree, but I do bring strong, rectangular energy and wildly unverified opinions.
Belle found Let's Call It Love in 1884 when she met fellow Norwegian immigrant Mattis Sorensen. By the way, Mattis, great name. The couple opened a candy store. They were unable to have children, but were economically well off enough that they adopted three girls, Jeannie, Myrtle, and Lucy, from neighboring families that couldn't afford their children. It seemed that Belle and Mattis were on their way to the American dream. Then, the first in a series of tragedies struck. A year after opening the store, a fire destroyed it. It was a complete loss. Fortunately, it had been fully insured. Bell told the insurance investigators an exploding kerosene lamp had started the fire. Despite finding no remains of a kerosene lamp, the insurance company paid out the claim. Bell and Mattis used the money to buy a home, which surprisingly burned down to a second insurance payout. In fact, the unlucky couple had three homes burned down, and then two of the children they fostered started to complain of stomach pains. The children suffered from pains, cramping, nausea, and diarrhea. They were diagnosed with acute colitis. While it is entirely possible the children had colitis, which was very common in the 1880s, it's important to note that these same symptoms are present with strychnine poisoning. Lessening the tragedy for Bell was the fact that both children had life insurance policies. Yet the horrific luck was not over. Mattis would soon drop dead from a cerebral hemorrhage.
Well, I'm sure it was just terrible for Belle, what with the cramping, vomiting, and child sized coffins. But thankfully, the life insurance payouts were there to help her grieve. Those poor kids suffering like that, they didn't stand a chance.
Once again, luck came to Bell's rescue. Mattis was, of course, insured, but Bell had convinced him that he needed a bigger policy, so he took out a larger policy on himself, canceling the smaller policy. But in a twist of fate that defies the odds, Mattis died on the one day that the old and new policies overlapped. Now, people were not stupid in 1900, but the total lack of any proof of wrongdoing forced both policies to pay off, and she collected $8,000, the equivalent to $100,000 in today's market. But again, understand making those comparisons of money over time is kind of weird because money still wasn't needed on an everyday basis, even for most people in 1900. Belle was now fairly wealthy, so she went out and bought a farm in LaPorte, Indiana. LaPorte had been a retirement dream of Mattis, and she was able to buy the property from the county, a two-story brick home on acreage that had been a brothel. She and three children, and sources conflict over which ones were adopted and which ones were foster children, moved into the farm. The neighbors were ecstatic to see a family of a widow and children moving in after the madam left. Some had questions about her hog pen, with a 6 foot high fence topped with barbed wire, but she cleaned the house up, had a nice fence built along the road, and seemed like a loving mother. But a lonely widow seems to need more companionship than can be offered by small children. Belle found a new man, Peter Gunness. Peter was a widower with one young child. He likely thought himself very lucky to find a woman with her own farm and money, and a mother on top of that. Surely he was fortunate to find a mother for his baby, complete with a full set of siblings.
Oh, yes, lucky Peter found himself a ready made family, a woman with land, livestock, and let's just say a talent for making people disappear. What could possibly go wrong?
You know, tragedy seemed to always find Belle. Peter's daughter, an infant, died early into the marriage, just a couple weeks after the wedding. Then, 8 months later, Peter had a horrendous accident. Jeannie reportedly had been in the basement when she heard a loud thump. Running upstairs, she saw Belle standing over Peter's body. Apparently, while trying to get something off of a wobbly shelf, a sausage grinder fell on his head, cracking his skull like a walnut. The coroner said the injury looked a, quote, little queer, unquote, but he accepted Jeannie and Belle's story about the sausage grinder. Of course, no one in Indiana knew anything about the numerous tragedies surrounding Belle, and she had received another insurance payout because of yet one more tragic death. Reportedly, one person did connect the dots. Jeannie Olson, Belle's foster daughter, supposedly told some classmates that, quote, my mama killed my papa. She hit him with a cleaver and he died. Don't tell a soul. It was not long after this that Jeannie never returned to school. Making it even odder was the fact that Jeannie didn't even say goodbye to Emil Golding, a neighbor boy who had taken an interest in the pretty blonde Jeannie and had started helping around the farm in Peter's absence. The teachers, Emil, and her classmates were told that she had been sent to boarding school in California. In reality, she never left the farm.
Sure, she went to boarding school in California. That tracks. And I'm sure that 6 foot hog pen was just for fun, nothing suspicious at all, except maybe to the pig, who probably had questions, but was too well fed to raise a hoof.
Mhm. Yeah, having owned a pig, I can vouch for the fact that they can't jump a 1 foot high fence, let alone 6 foot. Now, if Belle's story ended there, she would be a grade A psycho. But Belle was just getting warmed up. She started placing ads in Midwestern Norwegian language newspapers. We have the text of one of those ads. Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman well provided, with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with a personal visit. Triflers need not apply.
Translation: Hot widow seeks rich husband with short term potential and excellent life insurance. Serious fortunes only. Scrubs, dreamers, and men in good. Health need not apply.
I think you got Belle's psyche down here. The 1800s had seen about 800,000 Norwegians immigrate to the United States and Canada, most of the men far from home and lonely. Ads like this would have been like ants to honey. The promise of a nice farm, home cooked Norwegian meals, like, I'm going to try this Norwegian dish here, Fakarlakel, Farkalakel, I don't know, a mutton and cabbage dish that is the national dish of Norway. And just someone to talk to drew men in droves. It was also of note that most of these men, fairly recent immigrants, would have no family in the U.S. and few close friends.
AKA, no one will report them missing.
It's unknown how many men answered Bell's ad, but at least a few dozen. Each one brought with him a few $1,000s, their life savings. A farmhand would later say that she had a new man show up at the house about once a week. She introduced them as cousins, but she made sure to keep them away from the children. Then one day they would just be gone. A few days later, another cousin would show up. One man, George Anderson, managed to get out alive. Anderson had traveled from Missouri to meet Belle. Like so many others, he arrived on the farm full of the hope of a happy life with a new wife and a beautiful farm. When he awoke one night to find Belle standing over his bed with a maniacal look in her eyes, it freaked him out so bad that he immediately fled the home. Neighbors would later recall that she spent a great deal of time out by her hog pens at night. She also seemed to have a lot of wooden trunks sent to her home. They took notice because they said she could toss them around like they were filled with marshmallows. In hindsight, I'm sure they all were saying, well, that makes sense now. But at the time, they just noted it as odd and decided to mind their own business. Meanwhile, the men kept showing up and vanishing, usually in the dead of night, and no one raised an alarm.
I mean, I'm just assuming the trunks were her preferred method to transport the pig buffet. But seriously, ever heard of reusing? Maybe if she wasn't blowing the budget on fresh trunks every time, she wouldn't have needed quite so many gentleman collars.
In 1906, Andrew Hall-
Hageline.
Andrew Hageline saw a personal ad in the Minneapolis Tindian, a Norwegian language newspaper. If you're Norwegian and listening to this, I'm apologizing for all these horrible mispronunciations. Taken in by the promise of a wonderful new life on a farm, Andrew began to correspond with Belle. She wrote to him, quote, "We shall be so happy when you once get here. My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Belle seemed ready to play the long game as the letters flowed for more than a year. Then on the 3rd of January, 1908, Andrew moved to LaPorte to be with Belle. After reaching LaPorte, he and Belle went to the bank and had his money transferred from his old banks and placed into their account. It was shortly after the bank trip that he stopped sending letters to his brother Hazel. It seemed yet another man had walked out on Belle. Upset, she confided in a neighbor, "When am I ever going to learn? What did I do wrong that these men take such advantage of me?" It seemed that Belle wasn't the only one with questions. Hazel contacted Belle and demanded to know what had happened to his brother. Belle wrote, quote, "You wish to know where your brother keeps himself? Well, this is just what I would like to know." She suggested that maybe Andrew had gone to Chicago or maybe even returned to Norway. She told Hazel he was welcome to come look.
Don't do it. Sounds like a one-way ticket to the hog pen.
Without a man on the farm, Belle was worried about getting the needed work done. For a time, she hired a man named Ray Lamphere. It seemed that Lamphere had developed romantic feelings for Belle. He had become jealous of all the men that kept showing up at the farm. When Andrew showed up, Lamphere left the farm in a jealous rage. Joe Maxon was hired as a general handyman and farmhand. Unlike the other men in Belle's life, Maxon seemed to have no interest in her beyond employment. He was told to keep an eye out and sound an alarm if Lamphere came around. Other than that, he minded his own business and stayed in the small room above the kitchen. Meanwhile, Lamphere was bad mouthing Belle all around town. This impacted Belle because on the 27th of April, 1908, she went to a lawyer to have a will drawn up. She told the lawyer, quote, "That man is out to get me. I fear one of these nights he'll burn my house to the ground." In the will, she left everything to her children, and in case they weren't available, she stipulated the money be left to the Norwegian Orphans Home. The lawyer pointed out that that was not the correct name of the orphanage and that they would need the right name for the paperwork. Bell told him that could be filled in later. The will need to be completed now. She left the lawyer's office, stopping on the way home to buy some toys for her children and 2 gallons of kerosene. That night, her farmhouse went up in flames.
Geez, that escalated. She couldn't wait a few days first? Nothing suspicious about that. I hope the pig made it out alive.
Really got to be concerned about that pig. Joe Maxon was awakened by the smell of smoke, half asleep. At first, he thought breakfast was cooking. Quickly, he came to his senses and realized the house was on fire. Yelling for the others to wake up, he tried to exit through his bedroom door, but the door was stuck fast, or possibly blocked on the other side. He continued to bang on the door and scream for the children and Mrs. Gunness to get up and flee the home. He made it to the servant stairs from his room to the kitchen, all the while yelling for the family. Making his way out the screen door, he ran around the house but found every window spewing smoke and flame. 2 neighbors arrived. They and Maxon tried to bust the door down, but it wouldn't give. Then, in what can only be an act of desperation, they threw bricks at the house and the windows of the bedrooms, hoping to arouse the family. By the time the authorities arrived, the house was fully engulfed. Once the fire died, they entered what was left of the home and found the bodies of Belle and her 3 children in the basement. Only Belle's body was missing the head. They also noticed that her body was quite a few inches shorter than what they had remembered. Police searched in hope of finding Belle's head. When Azel read about the fire, he quickly traveled to LaPorte, hoping to find Andrew. He helped the police sift through the rubble of the house, but they turned up no head and no other bodies.
Bodies in the basement? That's not exactly where people tend to gather during a house fire. And Belle's the only one without a head? Come on. That's not tragic. That's strategic. Can't ID a body without a face. And being several inches shorter than remembered, either she shrank in the flames, which is possible, or someone's playing dress up with a corpse. Just saying.
It was Azel that asked Joe Maxon if he knew of any holes or depressions anywhere on the farm. Maxon said that, in fact, Bell had asked him to level several dozen depressions around the farm. The depressions, he was told, is where trash had been buried. Mason and Azel dug up one of the depressions inside the hog pen. There they uncovered a burlap sack, and inside the sack was Andrew's head, hands, and feet. They had been dusted with quicklime, but were still recognizable. The authorities started digging around any mounds or depressions they could find. Each one, they came across the contents of a burlap sack with heads, hands, and feet, and other body parts in various states of decomposition. Each had been dusted with quicklime. Most could not be identified. One that could was Jeannie Olson, Belle's foster daughter, who had been sent to California for school.
Oh, yes, the old pigs eat everything myth. Turns out they draw the line at heads, hands, and stinky feet. Even pigs were like hard pass. And Belle just out here planting body parts like she's growing a serial killer garden. Quicklime, burlap, repeat. Honestly, the woman didn't bury trash. She composted victims.
The story goes that after a while, the authorities stopped counting bodies. Sources disagree on the total, but it might be as high as 40. This total included her 4 children, 2 stepchildren, foster daughter, and 2 husbands. How many men walked into her farm to never leave is unknown. Of the sacks uncovered, some seem to contain parts from more than one body. For example, you might find like two left hands in one of the sacks. Then there's the question of Belle herself. Did she die in the fire? The body, lacking a head, can possibly be explained by the fire. Something called thermal amputation can occur if the fire is hot enough and burns long enough. Bodies have also been known to shrink in fires. Later DNA would be pulled from the letters licked by Bell and compared to the DNA from bones in storage. This proved to be inconclusive. As stories spread about the murder and the Ogress of Indiana, sightings of Bell popped up across the country. None, however, seemed credible. Ray Lamphere was arrested and charged with arson, but not murder. Then, under pressure, the charges were changed to include murder. He was questioned, said he knew nothing about, quote, the house of crimes, as they call it. When asked about the murders, he said, quote, I worked for Miss Gunness for a time, but I didn't see her kill nobody, and I don't know if she killed nobody. Much of the trial hinged on the headless body in the basement. Teeth were found in the remains of the home, which the dentist said belonged to Bell. He recognized the work on the teeth that he had done for Bell. When asked if they could have been pulled, he said no. Lamphere's defense called a doctor that had reported that poison had been found in the body of Andrew and the children and the headless body. It was also testified to by a neighbor that they had seen Bell with an unknown woman the day before the fire. It took the jury just over a day to come back with a verdict. Lamphere was found guilty of arson, but not murder.
All that, and they still pinned it on Ray. No head, just teeth, and a hunch. And suddenly he's the villain. He's literally said he saw nothing, knew nothing, and somehow he's on trial for murder. Meanwhile, Bell's probably halfway to Canada with a new name and a suitcase full of poison. But sure, blame the guy who didn't recently write the will.
Sentenced to 20 years in prison, Lamphere told his cellmate, Harry Meyer, that Bell was still out there. He would look out the barred window and say, She's out there, Harry. He also told Harry that Belle had a scar on her leg that wasn't present on the body found in the basement. Quote, Besides, I know where Belle is, and she's not far from here, believe me. Harry said that Lamphere talked about Belle daily for the years they spent together. For what it's worth, Belle reportedly was a madam living in the South, or a prostitute living on the East Coast. Some even said that she escaped back to Norway. Sightings continued for the next 30 years. People of Laporte even made sure to speed up when they were passing the site of her home. Years later, Lamphere was dying in prison. On his deathbed, he said that he and Belle had killed 42 men. She would have them clean out their bank accounts on the promise of marriage and ownership of a farm. His story was that she would poison their coffee with strychnine, then bash them over the head. I did the planting, he confessed. How much faith should we put in that deathbed confession is unclear. Why would he confess after all those years? But then, why would he lie? The mystery of Belle Gunness' death continues to puzzle us to this day. There is one interesting side note. In 1931, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning a Norwegian man after stealing his money. She died in jail while awaiting trial. Carlson would have been around the same age as Bell, 72, and many also thought that Carlson bore a striking resemblance to Bell. It was even said that Carlson had a photograph of children that looked a great deal like Bell's children.
Now he wants credit? Of course he does. Dying and suddenly decides he wants to be remembered. Classic. Such a guy things to do. And Belle, she played everyone like a fiddler and never looked back. Legend, monster, escape artist, whatever she was, she definitely orchestrated an exit.
Did Bell manage to escape her own death? It wouldn't have been hard to vanish in 1908. As for the body, it was said that Belle had a maid shorter than her that vanished about the time of the fire. If she walked away with a few $1,000s, it could set her up for life. A modest farmhouse with a little land could be bought for $1,500 in 1908. If she did walk away, did she continue her crimes unnoticed until 1931? Or was Carlson just another black widow with the same MO? Thanks to crimelab.org and allthat'sinteresting.com that were the main sources for this episode. This has been History is Criminal. Join us next week as we look at one of the most famous murders in Hollywood history, the Black Dahlia. And as I always say, if you like what you heard, tell a friend, and if you didn't, tell an enemy. Never suffer alone.